5 anchors removed before you were old enough to reach them, documented, funded, and replaced with something they chose on your behalf. This isn't a grievance. This is a map. Because if you know which 5 they specifically targeted, you know exactly where to go looking for the real ones. Words like justice and values get used as if everyone already agrees on what it means, and yet they act as if it means completely different things to completely different people. By definition, a value or a personal value is a source of meaning that shapes your behavior without you having to consciously redecide it every day. That's the functional definition. You can see that across various resources. It's not a belief that you hold, it's a structure you operate from. Now, what that actually means to us, the part nobody put in the curriculum, is that values have to come from somewhere. They're not formed in a vacuum. They're installed through family, through community, through tradition, through long, uninterrupted experience. In 1964, a philosopher named Herbert Marcuse published a book called One-Dimensional Man, Beacon Press. It's still in print. His thesis was not a conspiracy theory. It was a structural argument about what modern industrial society was doing to human beings at the level of desire itself. Think about who founded industrial society and who founded the culture around how people should operate in order to industrialize things, what the main motivation of industrialization was. He called it the engineering of false needs. His exact words, chapter 1, and I'm going to read it precisely. Most of the prevailing needs to relax, to have fun, to behave and consume in accordance with the advertisements, to love and hate what others love and hate, belong to this category of false need. He wasn't warning us. He believed the transformation was, in some sense, inevitable. In fact, advocated and exposed the plans of advertising to be brainwashing us. But here's what matters to us. The institutions that read this work found the framework actionable. Because if you can replace what a person genuinely needs with a managed substitute, you don't need to control them. They manage themselves. This is not a side effect of industrial society and progress in manufacturing. Managed compliance is the mechanism. So how does that mechanism actually work at the institutional level? Antonio Gramsci was an Italian political theorist imprisoned by Mussolini in 1926. He spent years in prison writing and thinking whatever came to his mind about power, and his thoughts on paper became known as the prison notebooks. His central concept was cultural hegemony. The idea is not complicated. You don't control a population by force. You control it by controlling what counts as normal, what counts as obvious, what counts as reasonable. He was explicit about the prerequisite. You have to displace the existing framework before you can install a new one. Kind of like changing operating system. Not because the existing framework is wrong, but because it's load-bearing. You can't build a replacement on an occupied foundation. That's the theory. Here's where it becomes institution. Norman Dodd was the chief investigator for the House of Representatives Special Committee to investigate tax-exempt foundations, the Reece Committee, in 1953. This is congressional testimony on the record. When pulling the transcript, here's what he stated: that the documented objective of major tax-exempt foundations was to, quote, so alter life in the United States that it can be comfortably managed with a different governing model. Their methodology from the testimony directly was changing the habits, thoughts, and opinions of Americans. House Report 83-2681. That is the document number. You can look it up. It's public. Carol Quigley, Georgetown University historian, published Tragedy and Hope in 1966. Bill Clinton cited him in name in his Democratic National Convention acceptance speech. Quigley documented what he described as the Anglo-American establishment, a network of institutions and foundations operating outside of the electoral accountability to shape Western culture and policy across decades. He wasn't a critic of the network. He believed it was working as intended. 3 independent sources, 3 different decades, all describing the same thing: the deliberate displacement of existing cultural anchors to create space for managed replacement. Not incidentally, architecturally. And when you dive deeper, and you start getting called crazy for seeing what publicly just hiding in plain sight, you start seeing the connections. You start seeing the parallels, and you start walking against the crowd. Here's what the 5 displacements look like, not as arguments, but as measurements. Anchor 1, transcendent meaning. The Pew Research Center, nonpartisan, documented that the share of Americans identifying as a Christian dropped from 78% in 2007 to 65% by 2019. I'm not going to make a theological argument here. I'm making a structural one. By definition, what organized faith functionally provided outside of any specific doctrine was a shared moral vocabulary, a framework for suffering that didn't require an institution to prescribe something, an intergenerational transmission of values, community accountability that predated the federal government by centuries. When that framework recedes, something moves in to fill it. And that vocabulary absolutely has been hijacked. The question worth asking is, who decided what fills that in? Robert Putnam, Harvard, spent a decade measuring what he called social capital. His book, Bowling Alone, documented roughly a 50% decline in civic participation across the second half of the 20th century. Church attendance, union membership, civic clubs, voluntary organizations, all trending in the same direction. Now, there's some corruption in there and a lot of who's got the most money and the most influence can do things within those church organizations, unions, and civic clubs. But across the same period, his conclusion, Putnam's conclusion, was something had systematically eroded the infrastructure Americans used to navigate life outside of managed institutional systems. He pointed to television as the mechanism. He stopped short of intent. The question he didn't ask was, who decided what went on television? Blaise Pascal, Pensoise, written in the 1660s. I probably butchered that. But put it this way, all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. The Bible describes this as, be still and know that I am God. Every contemplative tradition, every culture, they all converge on the same structure. The examined life requires silence. The ability to hear your own thinking uninterrupted is not a spiritual luxury. It's the baseline condition for self-determination. B.J. Fogg's Persuasive Technology Lab at Stanford published its methodology openly. The Behavioral Insights Team, the British government's nudge unit, was formally established in 2010 and now advises governments across multiple continents. They didn't remove your capacity for solitude. They engineered an environment where you would never choose solitude. That's a documented system, published, funded, global. You see the effects on young people. You see it affecting their behaviors. Marcuse gives us the framework. False needs can be engineered to replace authentic ones at the cultural level. Published 1964. Gramsci gives us the prerequisite. The existing load-bearing framework has to be displaced first. You cannot build a replacement on an occupied foundation. Dodd gives us the institution, congressional testimony, House report that major foundations were actively working to alter American habits, thoughts, and opinions. Quigley gives us the historian's confirmation, a documented network operating outside of electoral accountability, shaping culture over decades. Published 1966. Putnam gives us the 50-year measurement, what the displacement looked like from the outside. A 50% collapse in every form of civic anchor simultaneously across the same period. And Fogg and the nudge unit give us the final seal, the behavioral technology that ensures you never go looking for the original anchor because you're never in silence long enough to feel their absence. 5 anchors, 5 documented displacements, 6 independent sources across 70 years. This is not a coincidence. That's a pattern. And here's the only thing that matters about a pattern. Once you can see it, it loses invisibility. And once it loses its invisibility, it loses its leverage over you. Not because you're angry, not because you're resistant, because it requires you not to see it. The moment you do, the mechanism has to work harder. That's not optimism. That's the mechanical truth about how managed realities. That's pure gaslighting. The point of this episode is not rage bait, it's not anger, and it's not revolution. Anger is a managed response. You use it in marketing to get you to buy stuff after so many times of being exposed to it. The people who built these systems wrote entire chapters on how righteous anger functions as a containment strategy. We'll get to that. The point of this episode is a map. If the 5 anchors that were specifically displaced were transcendent meaning, civic bonds, extended family knowledge network, ancestral health intelligence, and the capacity for reflection, then rebuilding doesn't require a revolution. It doesn't require permission. It doesn't require a movement. It doesn't require communism. It's architectural. You start with what was removed and you decide with full information for the first time for yourself what you want to put back in. Episode 6 is where one of those 5 anchors gets its own receipt. The ancestral health knowledge pillar has the most marketing lies. And once you see how specifically it was targeted, the food aisle will never read the same. Before you go, one question, drop it in the comments. Which of the 5 hit you personally? Not which one is most important globally, which one that you felt in your own life, your own family, your own story. Drop it down below. That comment thread is going to be its own kind of documentary.